The heavy, gold-plated fountain pen felt like pure, freezing ice trembling uncontrollably in my violently shaking hand. The thick, legally binding contract, sitting ominously on the polished mahogany desk, completely, permanently sealed my terrible, inescapable fate. My uncle, a man who possessed absolutely zero conscience and zero familial love, greedily signed his messy name on the dotted line with a sickening, triumphant, deeply cruel smile. He had just officially, legally sold my entire life to completely wipe away his massive, suffocating $5 million underground gambling debt. He traded my freedom, my body, and my very soul to a ruthless, terrifying monster hiding in the deep mountains. I was officially, permanently, the documented property of the blind beast. I was absolutely, paralyzingly terrified. My incredibly painful, terrifyingly silent journey to the frozen, isolated mountains of Colorado began exactly 1 hour later. I was aggressively shoved into the back of a heavily tinted, massive armored SUV by two silent, towering enforcers. The cruel, glaring, chaotic neon lights of the Las Vegas Strip rapidly faded into the pitch-black, suffocating abyss of the empty desert night. I wrapped my oversized, thick, scratchy wool sweater tightly around my violently shaking frame, pulling my knees up to my chest. I desperately, frantically tried to hide the horrific, jagged, deeply raised scars completely covering my torso, my back, and the left side of my neck. The terrible, devastating fire happened when I was only 10 years old. My courageous, deeply loving parents died violently, screaming in the roaring, unnatural flames that mysteriously consumed our family home. They saved my pathetic, fragile life by throwing me from a second-story window, but left me permanently, horrifically disfigured by the intense heat. Since that tragic, bloody day, I was completely isolated, deeply feared, and entirely unwanted by the normal world. My cruel uncle had only legally adopted me just to quickly steal my small, remaining inheritance to fund his gambling addiction. He spent 14 long, agonizing years relentlessly breaking my fragile, traumatized mind. He constantly, viciously reminded me that I was a completely broken, defective omega, a useless burden on his life. He masterfully manipulated my lonely, isolated reality until I truly, deeply believed I was a disgusting, unlovable monster. Nobody will ever look at your burned, ugly skin without vomiting. Nora, he would cruelly whisper in my ear, his breath smelling of stale whiskey. He completely, thoroughly convinced me that I was absolute, unsalvageable garbage. And now he had thrown his worthless garbage away to a violent, legendary mountain warlord to settle a petty debt. The heavy, armored SUV carefully, slowly navigated the treacherous, winding, incredibly dangerous roads of the massive Rocky Mountains. The deep, blinding white snow completely swallowed the isolated, dangerous American landscape, reflecting the pale moonlight like a frozen ocean. We drove for 12 agonizing, completely exhausting hours straight into the frozen, unforgiving wilderness. We finally arrived at a massive, breathtaking, ultra-modern fortress constructed of heavy, dark timber and massive sheets of reinforced glass. It was aggressively, dominantly perched on the very edge of a terrifying, steep, plunging cliff overlooking a dark valley. This remote, deeply isolated fortress was the absolute, undisputed territory of Alpha Gideon Cross. He was an insanely wealthy, reclusive logging tycoon with a terrifyingly brutal, bloody reputation across the supernatural community. Rumors claimed he brutally, instantly murdered anyone who dared to look directly into his face. They whispered in terrified, hushed tones that he was a violently insane, deeply unpredictable savage who kept to the shadows because he was too monstrous for the light. The heavy, towering iron gates slammed completely, loudly shut behind the expensive vehicle with a sickening thud. My tragic, miserable, ruined life was now entirely, permanently, in his massive, lethal, unseen hands. My bruised, exhausted heart hammered so violently against my scarred ribs it physically ached. The massive, incredibly heavy, solid oak front doors were aggressively pushed open by two silent, incredibly muscular elite guards. I slowly, hesitantly, stepped into the incredibly grand, utterly silent, beautifully modern foyer of the mountain mansion. Despite the roaring fireplaces visible in the adjacent rooms, there was absolutely zero emotional warmth in the cavernous, glass-walled space. The air was incredibly still, thick with ancient power and suffocatingly quiet. Then, the distinct, rhythmic, heavy sound of boots echoed loudly from the sweeping, modern wooden staircase. Alpha Gideon Cross slowly descended the massive stairs, like a powerful, ancient, terrifying god stepping down from Mount Olympus. He was an absolute, towering giant, standing easily over 6'4". His perfectly tailored, expensive black suit stretched tightly across his impossibly broad, heavily muscular shoulders and thick chest. But my terrified, wide eyes immediately darted straight to his incredibly handsome, chiseled, pale face. A wide, thick, pitch-black silk blindfold was securely, tightly tied over his eyes, completely obscuring his vision. He was completely, entirely blind, yet he moved with terrifying, absolute, fluid precision, never hesitating or stumbling on a single step. His large, strong head tilted slightly, focusing perfectly toward my exact trembling direction. The overwhelmingly powerful, intensely masculine scent of dark amber, crushed pine needles, and heavy ozone slammed violently into my sensitive nose. It was the distinct, electric smell of a massive, brewing, destructive thunderstorm. My fragile, scarred knees began to violently shake in pure, pathetic, unadulterated fear. I fully expected him to growl, to bark a harsh command, to brutally, immediately assert his ultimate, purchased dominance over my small body. I desperately braced myself, closing my eyes, waiting for the cruel, violent, physical impact of his heavy, unpredictable anger. Instead, he simply stopped a few feet away from my trembling body, giving me plenty of space. He did not yell. He did not emit a single, suffocating wave of aggressive, punishing alpha pressure to force me to my knees. "You are freezing," Gideon rumbled softly. His voice was incredibly deep, resonating like dark velvet, and surprisingly, remarkably smooth. It held absolutely zero malice. He calmly, quietly instructed his silent, heavily armed guards to immediately bring me warm chamomile tea and dry, heated blankets. I stood completely stunned, rooted to the polished wood floor. The legendary, brutal mountain beast was treating me with quiet, careful, unexpected respect. The incredibly quiet, highly professional mansion staff softly escorted me to the massive, incredibly luxurious master bedroom on the top floor. The heavy oak door clicked softly shut, leaving me entirely, completely alone in the massive space. I sat rigidly, completely paralyzed by fear, on the very edge of the massive, silk-covered California King mattress. The freezing Colorado wind howled violently against the thick floor-to-ceiling glass windows, mirroring the chaos in my mind. I was waiting in the dark for my absolute, inevitable punishment. I was waiting for the violent, painful, humiliating consummation of our sick, arranged financial contract. I was a purchased good, and I expected to be used as one. 2 agonizing hours later, the bedroom door slowly, quietly opened, and Gideon stepped silently inside the dark, moonlit room. He still wore the wide, thick, black silk blindfold securely across his handsome face. He had removed his suit jacket, wearing only a black button-down shirt that clung to his massive chest. He calmly, deliberately, locked the heavy wooden door behind him, with a soft, terrifying click. Panic instantly, violently flooded my racing, terrified, erratic human heartbeat. My breath caught in a sharp, painful gasp. I desperately squeezed my scarred, fragile arms tightly across my aching chest, trying to make myself as small as physically possible. I squeezed my eyes tightly shut, trembling violently, waiting for the painful, tearing violence to finally begin. Gideon completely stopped moving in the exact center of the massive room, instantly freezing like a massive statue. His broad chest rose and fell with a slow, deeply calculated, calming breath. He tilted his strong, handsome head, listening intently, his heightened senses focusing completely on the frantic, chaotic rhythm of my absolute, unchecked terror. "You are hyperventilating," Gideon stated quietly, his deep voice entirely devoid of any cruelty, frustration, or demand. "Your heart is beating so incredibly fast I can physically feel the vibration in the floorboards." He slowly, deliberately raised his massive, powerful, pale hands directly in front of him, palms open, showing he carried absolutely no weapons and meant absolutely no harm. "I am not going to hurt you, Nora. I give you my absolute, solemn promise." He did not aggressively march toward the bed to violently rip my clothes away. He did not demand my absolute obedience as his newly purchased, legal property. Instead, he slowly, deliberately lowered his massive, towering body onto the expensive, thick Persian rug near the locked door. He sat completely still on the floor, crossing his long legs, providing a safe, massive physical distance between us. "I will sleep down here tonight," he murmured softly into the quiet, tense darkness, leaning his head back against the wall. "I will never, ever force you to do anything you do not actively, enthusiastically want. You are entirely safe in this house." The sheer, unbelievable, breathtaking gentleness of his fiercely protective words completely, utterly shattered my fragile, terrified expectations. I lay awake for hours, staring at his massive, still form in the dark, entirely unable to comprehend the monster who refused to act like one. 3 agonizing, deeply confusing, emotionally exhausting weeks slowly passed inside the massive, isolated, snowed-in mountain fortress. I spent my quiet, lonely days nervously navigating the completely empty, beautiful, sunlit mansion. Gideon was incredibly busy, constantly managing his massive global logging empire from his private, soundproof office on the first floor. We only shared quiet, intensely silent, heavily formal dinners at a massive, incredibly long mahogany dining table. He always, without fail, wore the thick, impenetrable, black silk blindfold. He was always perfectly polite, deeply respectful, and incredibly, undeniably gentle, pulling out my chair and ensuring I was served first. But the heavy, suffocating, invisible wall of thick trauma and deep shame between us remained entirely, stubbornly intact. I still desperately, constantly wore my thick, scratchy, oversized wool sweaters to completely hide my horrific, widespread deformities, even when the mansion was comfortably heated. I was absolutely terrified of the inevitable, horrifying moment he would accidentally discover my disgusting, ruined secret. He might be kind now, but no alpha could ever accept a physically broken, scarred Omega. One dark, ominous evening, a massive, violent, terrifyingly loud thunderstorm suddenly hit the treacherous Rocky Mountains. The booming, explosive thunder violently shook the expensive, thick glass walls of the massive house. A brilliant, blinding flash of lightning illuminated the dark living room, followed instantly by a deafening crash. The incredibly loud noise instantly violently triggered a horrific, paralyzing PTSD flashback to the raging, screaming fire that killed my parents. I collapsed heavily onto the living room rug, violently sobbing, clutching my head and completely unable to breathe. I was trapped back in that burning room, smelling the smoke, hearing the screams. Gideon instantly burst into the dark room, his massive body moving with desperate, blinding speed. He accurately, flawlessly dropped to his knees right beside my fiercely trembling, hyperventilating form. He hesitated for a fleeting, agonizing microsecond, his large hands hovering just inches from my shaking shoulders. "Nora, please let me touch you," he pleaded softly, urgently over the roaring, deafening thunder, his voice thick with raw concern. "Please, let me ground you in reality. You are not there. You are here, with me." I was crying so violently, so completely consumed by the terrifying panic attack, I could not formulate a single, coherent word. I just weakly, desperately nodded my head into the soft carpet. He gently, incredibly carefully, pulled my freezing, shaking, sobbing body directly into his incredibly warm, massive, solid chest. He wrapped his large arms securely around me, acting as a massive, impenetrable physical shield against the terrifying storm. But as he pulled me close, my oversized, heavy wool sweater slipped completely off my trembling right shoulder during the heavy fall. His large, calloused, incredibly sensitive fingers accidentally, lightly brushed directly against the thick, deeply jagged, raised scars on my bare shoulder blade. I violently, aggressively flinched backward in pure, absolute, unadulterated shame and total panic, trying to scramble away from his touch. "Don't touch it!" I sobbed hysterically, trying desperately to pull the heavy sweater back up. "It is completely disgusting. I am absolutely ruined. Don't feel it." I fully expected him to instantly, violently pull his hands away in complete physical revulsion, to recoil from the hideous texture of my ruined skin. I expected the kindness to finally end. But the real, beautiful secret of that stormy night wasn't just his gentleness. It was what his sensitive fingertips were, slowly, magically awakening inside my dead soul. Gideon did not pull his incredibly warm hands away from my scarred, imperfect, ruined skin. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, incredibly tenderly traced the deep, jagged edges of the terrible burn marks. His gentle, exploring touch was incredibly soft, incredibly reverent, exactly like he was tracing fragile, priceless, ancient porcelain. "Disgusting," Gideon whispered deeply, his smooth, dark voice completely filled with raw, overwhelming, fiercely protective emotion. "Nora, this is not disgusting. This is the exact feeling of an absolute, incredible, profoundly strong survivor." He slowly leaned forward and gently, incredibly softly, pressed his warm, soft lips directly against the thickest, ugliest, most prominent scar on my collarbone. A violent, brilliant jolt of pure, intense, beautiful electricity shot straight through my aching spine. My breath completely hitched in my throat. Nobody had ever, in my entire miserable life, touched my broken, ugly body with such profound, undeniable, absolute worship. I completely broke down, collapsing against his chest, crying heavy, silent tears of pure, absolute, overwhelming, deeply healing relief. The profound, incredibly beautiful intimacy of that stormy night completely, permanently changed our entire dynamic. I slowly, hesitantly stopped wearing the suffocating, oversized, scratchy wool sweaters around the warm, safe house. I allowed Gideon to gently, patiently map the extensive, jagged scars covering my back, my sides, and my arms every single night as we sat by the fire. His incredibly soft, calloused fingertips tracing my ruined skin became our unique, private, incredibly intimate language of pure acceptance. I finally, truly, felt genuinely beautiful, profoundly cherished, and incredibly, perfectly safe in his dark world. But the massive, looming, frustrating mystery of his permanent, thick, black silk blindfold still heavily bothered me. Why did a man with such immense, absolute power, such vast wealth, choose to hide in total, suffocating darkness? One quiet, peaceful evening, we sat close together on the expensive, plush white rug by the roaring, crackling fireplace. I gently, hesitantly, reached up, my small fingers lightly, softly touching the edge of the heavy black silk covering his face. Gideon's massive, relaxed body went completely, terrifyingly rigid under my soft, exploring fingertips. He stopped breathing. "Why do you wear this, Gideon?" I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper, afraid of breaking the fragile peace. "Were you severely, physically injured in a violent pack battle? Is it scarring you don't want me to see?" Gideon let out a long, incredibly heavy, deeply painful, shuddering sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. He gently, firmly wrapped his massive, warm hand securely around my small, delicate wrist, pulling my hand away from the silk barrier. "I am absolutely not physically blind, Nora," he confessed, his deep voice thick with heavy, ancient sorrow. My entire world suddenly, violently tilted on its axis. "What?" I gasped softly, my eyes widening in pure shock. Then, why do you live completely in the darkness? Why do you hide your eyes from the world? Gideon gently squeezed my hand, keeping it pressed against his chest. "Because I am heavily, violently, lethally cursed," he admitted darkly, the pain evident in every single syllable. "My ancient bloodline carries a devastating, incredibly lethal magical mutation. If I look directly into the eyes of another living creature with unchecked, raw emotion, my gaze actively, violently destroys their mind. I literally, magically burn their sanity to absolute ashes, leaving them brain dead." The horrific, tragic reality of his existence slammed into me. He had deliberately, purposefully, isolated himself in these frozen, lonely mountains to protect innocent people from his own destructive power. He voluntarily, painfully bound himself in permanent, suffocating darkness to keep his pack completely safe. He was not a cruel, violent, mindless beast hiding from the light. He was an incredibly noble, deeply selfless, tragically lonely, fiercely protective king carrying an agonizing burden. The profound, heartbreaking magnitude of his silent, agonizing sacrifice brought hot, fast tears directly to my eyes. I leaned forward and gently kissed the black silk covering his cursed eyes. Our quiet, beautiful, healing sanctuary was violently, aggressively shattered the very next afternoon. The heavy, sophisticated security gates of the massive mansion aggressively, loudly buzzed with an incoming, unauthorized perimeter breach. I walked slowly into the grand, glass-walled foyer, completely freezing in my tracks, my blood turning to pure ice. My cruel, abusive, highly manipulative uncle was standing aggressively in the center of the pristine, expensive room. His arrogant, sweaty face was twisted into a sick, greedy, extremely confident, deeply ugly smile. He had, somehow, impossibly bypassed the elite, heavily armed mountain security forces. "Hello, my pathetic, ugly, worthless little niece," he sneered loudly, his voice echoing in the large space. "Did you honestly, foolishly think your new, rich monster husband would just pay me off once? I know how much he's worth." My fragile heart instantly, violently dropped entirely into my stomach in pure, absolute, paralyzing panic. He had come back to ruthlessly, aggressively extort more millions from Gideon. He aggressively, quickly pulled a highly illegal, heavy, silver-loaded weapon from his cheap, dirty leather jacket, aiming it directly at my chest. I am going to completely, thoroughly drain his massive bank accounts. My uncle threatened dangerously, his eyes wide with desperate greed. Or I will sell the highly lucrative, embarrassing story of his pathetic, blind, crippled weakness to his massive corporate rivals. They'd love to know the great alpha is a blind invalid. I did not cower. I did not drop to my knees in pathetic, terrified, submissive tears like I always used to when I lived under his cruel roof. The fierce, deeply protective, overwhelming instinct to desperately save Gideon completely overrode my old, paralyzing childhood trauma. I aggressively, boldly stepped directly between my cruel uncle and the long hallway leading to Gideon's private office. "You will not take a single, pathetic, dirty dime from him," I growled fiercely. My voice carried a shocking, unfamiliar, completely undeniable, powerful strength. I was not his victim anymore. I was Gideon's mate. My uncle laughed cruelly, a harsh, barking sound, and tightened his finger on the deadly weapon. But before he could even pull the heavy trigger, a massive, terrifying shadow exploded into the bright room. Gideon moved with terrifying, blinding, absolute supernatural speed. He did not need his cursed eyes to accurately, flawlessly track the aggressive, threatening, panicked heartbeat of a dangerous intruder. He violently, aggressively grabbed my uncle's gun-wielding arm. With a simple, effortless twist, he easily, brutally shattered the fragile bone in a single, sickening second. My uncle screamed in pure agony. The heavy silver weapon clattered harmlessly onto the polished marble floor. Gideon aggressively, violently pinned the screaming, pathetic man entirely against the heavy, bulletproof glass wall. His massive muscles bulged terrifyingly beneath his dark shirt, his chest heaving with murderous fury. "If you ever come within 50 miles of my mate again," Gideon roared with lethal, bone-chilling, earth-shattering fury, his voice dropping to a demonic register, "I will literally, physically rip your head directly from your shoulders and feed it to the wolves." He literally, effortlessly threw my terrified, sobbing uncle entirely out the massive front doors into the snow. The heavily armed elite security team, having finally arrived, violently dragged the sobbing, broken, ruined man away into the freezing, unforgiving winter storm. I aggressively rushed forward and threw my shaking arms tightly around Gideon's massive, heaving, adrenaline-fueled chest. I buried my face deeply into his warm, solid shoulder, trembling violently from the massive, terrifying adrenaline crash. Gideon instantly wrapped his powerful, massive arms tightly around me, burying his face deep in my hair, inhaling my scent to calm his inner wolf. He gently, repeatedly ran his large, warm hands up and down my scarred, trembling back to soothe my racing heart. But suddenly, his incredibly fast, soothing hands completely froze mid-motion. His large, highly sensitive fingertips pressed deeply into the specific, jagged pattern of scars crossing my spine. He traced the deeply raised, jagged lines with intense, sudden, frantic, desperate focus. "Nora," Gideon whispered breathlessly, his deep voice shaking with pure, unadulterated, profound shock. "These specific marks, they are absolutely not random burn injuries." He quickly, frantically traced the massive, thick scar near my left shoulder blade. "This is the ancient, highly specific, forgotten runic symbol for pure light, and this one, running down your spine. It is the exact, ancient symbol for absolute binding." My mind completely spun in chaotic, overwhelming confusion. "What are you talking about?" I asked frantically, stepping back slightly to look at his blindfolded face. Gideon's breathing became incredibly shallow and highly erratic. "Your parents were not just ordinary wolves, Nora. They were the absolute last living, powerful descendants of the ancient, legendary healer caste," he explained rapidly, his hands trembling as he touched my arms. "Before the fire killed them, they deliberately, purposefully used raw, intensely hot magic to physically brand you. They desperately hid the sacred, lost cure for my bloodline's devastating curse directly on your living, breathing skin." The massive, unbelievable, world-shattering revelation hit me like a devastating, speeding, heavy freight train. My ugly, horrifying, deeply hated scars were actually an ancient, incredibly powerful, desperately hidden, magical map. Gideon aggressively picked me up in his arms and carried me straight into his massive, dark, private library. He laid me gently, reverently onto a soft, expensive leather sofa. "May I read them completely?" he asked, his deep voice shaking with intense, desperate, fragile hope. I nodded quickly, completely overwhelmed by the massive, shifting, incredible reality. Gideon closed his covered eyes, completely focused entirely on his highly sensitive, calloused fingertips. He slowly, methodically, beautifully traced every single painful, jagged, raised scar on my back, my ribs, and my neck. As his massive hands accurately read the ancient, hidden, magical language, a warm, blindingly brilliant, intensely bright golden light began to visibly pulse from my scarred skin. The intense, incredibly powerful healing magic flowed directly from my ancient scars, straight into his sensitive fingertips. The ancient, heavy, dark curse violently binding his soul aggressively fought back, sending cold shadows through the room. But the pure, golden light of the ancient healers was completely undeniable. A massive, silent explosion of raw, ancient energy violently shook the dark library, knocking books from the shelves. Gideon collapsed backward onto the expensive, thick rug, gasping violently for large, desperate lungfuls of air. One. The blinding, radiant golden light completely faded into quiet, peaceful, still darkness. He sat heavily on the floor, his massive chest heaving with extreme, profound, absolute exhaustion. Slowly, with trembling, massive, pale hands, he reached up behind his head and grabbed the thick knot of the black silk. He pulled the heavy, restrictive blindfold completely off his face for the very first time in 10 agonizing years. I instantly, violently squeezed my eyes shut, aggressively turning my heavily scarred, ruined body away in pure, absolute, terrified panic. He was cured. He could finally see clearly. And the very first thing he would ever see with his newly freed eyes was my ruined, disgusting, deeply scarred, imperfect flesh. "Please don't look at me," I sobbed desperately, curling into a tight ball, trying frantically to cover my exposed, scarred shoulders with my trembling hands. "I am too incredibly ugly for you. Please, put it back on." I felt the soft, incredibly expensive rug shift under his heavy weight as he crawled slowly toward me. He gently, firmly grabbed my trembling, cold hands and pulled them firmly away from my crying face. I slowly, hesitantly, opened my terrified, tear-filled eyes and looked directly into his. His eyes were an incredibly stunning, piercing, absolutely flawless shade of brilliant, crystal-clear ice blue. There was absolutely zero destructive, burning, lethal, magical fire in his clear, beautiful gaze. The deadly, ancient, suffocating curse was completely and permanently broken. But he was not looking at me with shock. He was not looking at me with disgust, or violent physical revulsion, or pity. He was looking at my heavily scarred, tear-stained face with absolute, profound, completely overwhelming, fierce adoration. Hot tears streamed quietly down his handsome, chiseled, perfect cheeks. "You are the most breathtaking, incredibly beautiful, magnificent creature I have ever seen," Gideon whispered brokenly, his voice cracking with intense, overwhelming emotion. He gently, tenderly, kissed my tear-stained cheek. He did not care about the jagged, raised, angry scars. He saw the brave, beautiful, incredibly resilient soul that successfully, miraculously, survived the brutal, devastating fire. He saw the incredibly strong woman who had permanently, beautifully saved his entire, lonely, desperate, cursed life. Today, the beautiful, modern glass mansion in the snowy Rocky Mountains is completely filled with incredible warmth, bright sunlight, and loud, genuine laughter. Gideon completely, legally, and financially dismantled my uncle's pathetic, corrupt, abusive life from afar, using his massive corporate power, ensuring he would rot in a federal prison. I never, ever have to hide in thick, suffocating, oversized, scratchy wool sweaters ever again. I wear beautiful, elegant, backless silk dresses that proudly, defiantly display my unique, magical, life-saving scars. Gideon is the most incredibly powerful, highly respected, and deeply loved alpha in the entire Western United States. But sometimes, when the massive house is completely quiet and the thick, white snow falls heavily outside the glass walls, he does something incredibly amazing. He gently, playfully ties the old black silk blindfold back over his bright, beautiful blue eyes. He blindly, confidently pulls me into his incredibly warm, strong, fiercely protective arms, because reading the map of my ancient scars with his gentle fingertips became our ultimate, private, beautiful language of pure, unconditional love. He showed me, completely and utterly, that true beauty is never found in superficial, flawless, boring perfection. True, undeniable beauty is found in the deeply resilient, scarred soul that survives the devastating roaring flames. Do you absolutely love incredibly satisfying, deeply emotional hurt and comfort shifter romances? Thank you so much for listening to this amazing, healing, deeply romantic audio story. If you want to actively support my channel and access amazing, exclusive romance content, please consider joining my amazing Patreon family today. The direct link is easily waiting for you in the description box below. How did you feel when Gideon completely, brutally destroyed the cruel uncle in the foyer? Did you expect the massive, magical, beautiful twist about the hidden scars? Let me know your exact, wonderful thoughts in the comments section right now. I always read your amazing feedback, and it means absolutely everything to my channel's growth. Please hit that subscribe button to help me create more epic, satisfying romance content. Stay beautiful, stay resilient, love your scars, and see you next time. Lily.